Welcome to Through Your Looking Glass, a podcast that explores the world of research technology. Combining speed and insights, ResTech reflects a deeper knowledge of the people around us. We're leading the conversation about this complex industry, which spans from traditional market research to advertising, media measurement, and beyond. Join us as we chat with experts and enthusiasts in the ResTech community and learn more about its evolution, application, and ever-growing potential.
Welcome. My name is Patrick Comer, and I'm the founder and CEO of Lucid. And on this special episode of Through Your Looking Glass, I'm talking with my dear friend and colleague, Brett Schnittlich, who has been my co-conspirator, my partner in crime on so many projects in this industry, not the least of which, of course, is Lucid, but also this ResTech conference, which is coming up. So welcome, Brett, to Through Your Looking Glass. I'm glad you were able to make it.
Well, thank you so much, Patrick. I'm thrilled to be part of it, and just reflecting on what you said. It's, dude, it's the better part of 20 years that you and I have been working together, and I think both of us have reflected upon the reality that this is like the longest working relationship, like professional relationship of both of our lives. That's been pretty consistent, and it's something I'm super proud of.
Well, likewise, man. We've been through many projects, many ups and downs, both professionally and personally. Mm-hmm. We've also been there for each other, and I'm just excited to share this moment. And I don't just mean this interview, but this moment together in our. I think we can officially say our industry. We've both been doing this long enough to claim it a little bit.
Yeah, but true.
In our industry, right? Frightening, but true, right?
Yes. Yeah, no, it's been one hell of a journey. I mean, I reflect back on just you and I meeting each other. And I mean, like I said before, it's knocking up on 20 years. But I was doing private equity. And we wound up acquiring a company out of the Los Angeles area called OTX. We actually bought that company from another company called iFilm, which is where you were working at the time. Yep. And soon after the acquisition, the pilot team, who was the private equity company that did the acquisition, asked me if I'd be interested in moving out to LA to help general manage, which I did, and it was a blast of a ride. But you're one of the first people that I met when I got there, even though you weren't part of OTX, but you had an interesting job at a company. You were at iFilm, where back in the day, they were one of the hot places on the internet where people were watching lots of videos, and a core part of your job was funneling traffic from people watching stupid cat videos to trying to convince them to take surveys. And back then, especially, OTX's meat and potatoes business was doing trailer tests for movies. So it was basically the same act, watching a video, yep, and then coming and watching a video of, a trailer for a soon to be upcoming movie. And, one of the kind of, when I think back to those days, it was myself and a CFO who were sent out, for lack of a better word, from the private equity team to help with OTX. And it was very early days in that process. We realized that there was this thing called sample that we knew nothing about, but that it was very obvious. It was a tremendously large proportion of the COGS of this company that we just acquired, and it was also incredibly obvious to us that we were. I won't say we were single sourced, but we were not multi-sourced in our ability to acquire this asset that we needed to run a research business. We met through the relationship of iFilm. But one of my proudest moments was you had left iFilm for a little while, starting up a business in the space actually, and you and I ran into each other at the Starbucks around the corner from OTX on Orange, if I believe, in the middle of West Hollywood.
Like Orange and La Brea.
Yeah,
like
Orange
that,
and La Brea. Well, most importantly, really, really, really close to a great burger joint, In-N-Out Burger. Damn, miss those things. But ran into each other in at that Starbucks, and I convinced you to come and join us at OTX to help us solve the sample problem. I mean, it was the beginning of a great relationship. I mean, I reflect back to, in talking to researchers way back when, sample was literally a means to an end. It was not it was the dirty underbelly of market research. It was not the sexy piece of it. But if you looked at the financials of the organization, getting that right was super important. Getting to a place where we could get the cost appropriate, we had the appropriate levels of competition in the supply chain was going to become mandatory for us to succeed the way we were all hopeful we would succeed. And we brought you in to help solve that problem. And lo and behold, over the next 4 or 5 years, we went from paying too much to paying a whole lot less, to having too few suppliers, to having a ton of suppliers, to a point where we actually had overage of traffic. And a few of us had this bright idea of setting you up in a brand new business inside of OTX that we called RSX, which in the nicest of ways was basically how do we build a business selling our overage to the rest of the research industry. And it turned into a very fast growing part of the organization. You took over half the building of our new location when we moved into Culver City, and it was just tremendous success. It was the beginning of our relationship, and I mean, just to make it a little personal for a second, I mean, I also think about, it's when we became friends. I remember the moment you came and told me that you had come on from a college reunion and met who was obviously going to be your wife. Like there's just been so many personal things that we've been there for each other in the process. But OTX was a fabulous success. RSX was an absolute success, and the technology that we got to build together at OTX, I mean, it was instrumental in part of the reasons that Ipsos was so intrigued in acquiring that company, and that was the end of that arc, but it was the beginning of another arc, and that next arc was Federated Sample and what is now Lucid.
Well, I like what you were saying about, and in the beginning, back in the day, sample wasn't seen as the sexy part of the business, and we've been able, through technology and innovation, to make not only the sampling but the distribution, the data collection, to be sexy, and to highlight to not only the market research industry but to the broader industries that we engage with, like ad tech or martech, that data collection is much easier and simpler than it's ever been before. So I think we've always been struggling with this question of who are we, which is why this moment in time is so important, where we talk about ResTech as a label, where we talk about the ResTech conference as a moment in time, because we've been struggling as a group of companies, as an industry, with identity, but also owning the identity in a favorable way, like really holding ourselves in not a boastful way, but being proud of what we've accomplished and really recognizing the digital disruption in our space. Just want to shout out, you talked about the success of RSX at Lucid, and that would have been really impossible without the leadership of Allison Strabick, who was my partner in crime there, and also David Schenker came in to lead as well. So those individuals were instrumental in that success story, and we wouldn't have gotten as far down the path without them.
Nor without Shelley Zalas or Jeff Dean, just to call it out.
Absolutely.
It was a dream team, and we got to do some really innovative things and push the envelope of what research was, and also push the envelope of what wound up becoming, the next generation of the sample business.
Digging into this.
I'm sorry. time out, I'll pause and say it again. I was going to play off on something you said just a moment ago, Patrick, which was, this struggling of trying to describe what it is that we were doing. It was always very abstract. I can think, talking to our earliest investors, just trying to explain this business. It was really difficult for your average investor to wrap their head around it. But I also think too, if there was a magic trick that we had way back when, was, understanding how an industry was transforming that was tangential to us, which was the advertising industry, and seeing the advent of companies like DoubleClick and Right Media, and the beginnings of the marketplaces and exchanges, and the DSPs and the DMPs, and I think one of the things that you in particular did so well was, not only did we see the fact that there were similarities in the transition of industries that we were both going through, but the way that you also took the nomenclature out of the ad tech industry, which, by the way, not only were customers understanding, but the investment community was understanding. They understood very quickly what a marketplace exchange, a DSP, a DMP, a DSP, an SSP, they were able to grok what that was. And for us to be able to overlay those words and labels on the industry that we were playing and that seemed a little more abstract, I think took us a long way, a really long way, and actually kind of gets us to where we are today. And, I kind of want to ask, but I know the answer, but at the same time, I want to ask the question of, what was the inspiration of building this concept of a ResTech landscape?
Well, I think there are a couple of pieces of that. One is the label ResTech, and as you just said, we, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, we made an official decision to take the language of ad tech and parlay it into our industry, into the programmatic research industry, all about APIs, connection, and disruption. There was a lesson there that I had to learn as an entrepreneur and founder and early leader in the space, is that it is okay and very good to adopt language from someone else, from somewhere else, because it gives the opportunity for other people to understand. And that was very powerful. I remember standing up at the Casro at that time conference and saying, we as Lucid, and we welcome everyone else, or should adopt this programmatic language. And it was also realizing that over time, it wasn't just the language, that there was a number of very successful, fast-growing companies that were not getting the credit they should in terms of excitement by investors. Obviously, for example, Qualtrics has done a tremendous job in storytelling and category creation. And let's be honest, I wanted that same halo effect for Lucid, but also the ecosystem around us. We have done the hard work. We've built, as a group of companies, very successful, fast-growing, technology-first SaaS businesses, but we weren't getting the attention. And I realized that part of it, again, was we didn't have a definition of the industry. So very simply, I was like, well, we need our own tech. We need our own something tech. And the reality is that none of the options were what I'd call super glorious, super sexy. Any brand manager in the right mind may not go after them. But we took this idea to the SampleCon membership just before COVID shut everything down, and worked with our marketing team at Lucid, but listed several techs: Insight Tech, Data Tech, ResTech, and maybe a couple more, and really asked the audience to digest this concept, the need for it, and what should the answer be. And as I've said, ResTech only won by a hair. It was a very small hair, but I didn't care about what it was. Like, I could convince myself that any of these were good. I just needed an answer so that we could start building a story around an industry. Because the funny thing is that research is growing broadly at the same rate as advertising, 6 to 8% per year. They grow roughly in tandem.
Yep.
But this subset called ad tech is growing really, really fast and getting a lot of attention, as it should, in investment. And so there's this subset of companies in the research space that are also doing the same thing, leading the digital transformation of an industry. And those companies need to be highlighted for a variety of different reasons. Well, and so that's where ResTech really came about.
Yeah, one of the things that I reflect on as you and I, kind of made the rounds through the investment community, talking to the growth equity folks and the private equity folks. Once the penny dropped, and we got through the hard work of trying to explain this kind of obscure little part of the research industry. Once the penny dropped, every single investor that I think we've ever spoken with suddenly went really deep. They went really deep and they would ask the questions, like in real time in the meeting. So wait, hold on. You sit in this interesting position of a marketplace connecting buyers and sellers. Tell me more about those buyers and tell me more about those sellers. And, I reflect back to 5-6 years ago. It was very simplistic. The suppliers, all the suppliers looked the same. All the buyers looked the same. It was people working the affiliate world, finding access to traffic, getting them to double opt in, and turning that into respondent traffic. On the other side, it was companies that called themselves market research companies. I think the interesting, it's been joyful for me, and I'm sure it has been for you as well, is to watch these organizations on both sides pop up that no one would have called fundamentally sample companies or research companies, or if platforms like ours didn't exist. And one of the things that I'm personally excited about with being out there advocating for this ResTech landscape is giving that spotlight to these organizations who use this brand new technology that did not exist, and it was the beginning of the flywheel that they spun to create whole new things that, let's be honest about it, neither you or I ever thought that those use cases would pop up. No. We never imagined that there would be user testing companies who would want to access the traffic on our platform. We never thought there would be companies who would fundamentally change the way brand research works, and they would hate us if we called them brand research companies because they do something different, but they would fundamentally not have been able to build those businesses if it wasn't for the platforms that now exist because of the programmatic environment that got created. I take a tremendous amount of joy in watching what's been built up around us. I have another question for you, kind of going down the path of building out the ResTech landscape. You and I have talked to the kind of the leaders in building these scapes in the first place. Luma Partners kind of started this whole concept, and people talk about Lumascapes, sometimes not even realizing there's a company called Luma behind it.
There's actually a company there.
There's actually a company there, but they gave us some of the things to think through, some of the interesting upsides and pitfalls, but specifically going through this exercise, what have been the largest challenges, you think, in putting together this ResTech landscape?
Well, I think the hardest part was convincing ourselves to actually release it. It's a tremendous amount of work, and lots of people have done scapes for our industry, but they've never, one, publicly released them, and B, also publicly asked for commentary. Said, this is a work in progress. We know that it's wrong out of the gate because it's meant to be a work in progress with our peers and friends in the industry. So the first real challenge was getting over putting a draft out, as it were. there's always that risk that people will hate it. And the response has been phenomenal. We've got over 500 different bits of feedback from our scape that we've been going through. We've had a number of people respond because they believe that it needs to be reconfigured. Is it all the buckets in the right place? There's of course, where's my company? Where's my friend's company? Or you've mislabeled the company or this and that, all of which are very important to work through. What was glorious about working with our friends at Luma Partners is they really explained one simple fact is that the scape is always going to be wrong. No matter what you do to change it, it's going to be wrong in some way because it's a dynamic industry. Things are evolving fast. And a product launched from last year could quickly become a major player in a brand new category that you didn't even know was going to exist 6 months later.
Yep.
So as there's so much dynamism, it's really hard for a static scape to be accurate all the time. But also that it's okay for companies to live in different parts of it as you recognize that some of their products are really meaningful to the specific categories. But the key thing that I saw was just the incredible size of response from everyone in the industry to really want to get this right. And it led me to believe that the scape would be valuable as what I call a treasure map, where which is basically what it is, that it provides a framework for people who don't know our space very well. For those of you who are not in our industry, if you want to know what our industry looks like, here is a map that will show you how it fits together, who the individual companies are, but the categories of companies and what they do. It provides an entry point of explanation. And what I like is it can close that gap. I mean, how many times have you and I, Brett, met with not only investors, potential partners who are outside the space, maybe in media or advertising, trying to explain what we do, even in the context of their own world. And there's this time of explanation, of convincing, of really trying to help them understand. And if we can shorten that through this kind of work around a ResTech scape and other types of content, we will have done a tremendous service to the industry and also to ourselves, because it will provide what I'll call speed to trust, speed to believe that this sector of industry is valuable, interesting, and they should pay a lot of attention to it.
Yeah,
so those are some of the lessons that we've learned there.
Yeah, and I'm going to double click right on you, Patrick. Here, you know, in the world that in the world that I live in these days, spending most of my time talking to whether it is partner type companies or the investment community, I'm finding the tool incredibly useful. It's helping, interestingly, to validate the thinking that they already kind of have, but they're not able to completely formulate their thinking. It's as you said, it's a roadmap. It's allowing them to validate the understanding of an interesting, rapidly growing, highly disruptive space that's happening before everyone's eyes, but a little bit under the radar.
Right.
And I've just personally found it to be a great tool in those conversations, which I guess leads me to my next question of we're on one more time, sorry, which leads me to my next question, which is on the 24th of March, we're hosting a small little conference to launch ResTech to the larger world. And you know, I have a few different things that go through my mind. Question one is, what's the feedback you've been getting on both the conference, mostly the conference, but the ResTech landscape and its relationship to the conference?
Well, most of the feedback, I get a couple different types of feedback so far, and I'm very excited about this conference coming up. Before I answer that, I'll just a sidebar that we learned about the power of bringing people together when we launched the SampleCon conference for the sample providers back in 2013, where there's a tremendous amount of, I'll say, power of professionalism when you can bring your competitors and your peers together in the same place and really talk about topics that impact them. So I learned a lesson of how that can work years ago. I wanted a moment in time where investors and companies could have a conversation about growth in the context of what investors would normally like to see, revenue, growth potential, market sizing, and the rest. And really have an opportunity for those investors who have conviction, who have actually either already made big investments or are seriously considering them, to explain for those who may be thinking about it or on the precipice, the why. What is it interesting? Why are they compelled to get conviction and potentially underwrite an investment in this particular space? Some of the feedback I get, of course, now is, well, I want to be involved. And that's the highest honor that we could get. Even this morning, another investment bank said, how can I get involved? And my answer is simple. If this is successful, and I believe that it will, given the number of registrations and also the quality of participants involved, we will do this again. This is not the last. This is just the first. So an important point there. But the feedback mainly is it's about time. Mm-hmm. We've needed this for a while. Mm-hmm. And most company CEOs that I speak to, their first reaction to this entire story is, this is needed, I can use this immediately, and how can I dive in? And a perfect example of that is Rob Holland at Feedback Loop. When I told him our strategy before the Escape was released, before we were talking about ResTech, he went out of his way to say, we are all in, mm-hmm. whatever you need, specifically because he understood the power of defining the space, shrinking or eliminating that gap of knowledge and reducing the friction that outsiders have to understanding. And it's partners like Rob Holland and many others that have made ResTech even more successful because it's mutually valuable.
Yeah, two things that I reflect on. So number one, I'm pleasantly shocked, but nevertheless still shocked at the quality and level of folks and companies that are involved in this conference. Without going through the entire list, these are significant players, whether it's in the investment banking space or the private equity space. These are very large companies who have been very successful, who are eager to be part of this conversation. The other thing that I'm finding rather enlightening is watching the penny drop, watching the moment when people start to understand. So it's the reflection by these communities looking at the ResTech landscape and realizing what it actually does impact. That it does impact everything from the advertising world to the product development world. The places that it touches are very different than what people normally think about when they think of the word research. You think about research, you think about the survey business, end of story. And the exercise that we went through in building the landscape and now bringing this group of people together to talk more about it, they're making the connections. They're seeing how the world of insights is actually connected to things as far away as identity. And as identity becomes even more interesting in literally in the last 24 hours, with Google's most recent announcement that we all knew was coming, but is now official, that the world of having high quality, first party, deterministic, high quality, collected correctly, and having
like ethically sourced.
Yes, ethically sourced, and having that unlocking things in tangential industries, and by the way, watching the investors' eyes open up and realize how they can connect the dots through maybe even the portfolios that they're managing. I'm personally finding I'm finding it to be a really fascinating moment.
So Brett, what are you most looking forward to about ResTech conference? Is it the panel that you're leading, or is it what are you looking forward to seeing?
I'm looking forward to a bunch of parts of it. I mean, kind of reflecting back to you mentioned SampleCon. I remember the first one. I remember this idea, the audacity we had of trying to pull this all off, and in down in New
Yeah.
Orleans, and the crazy hustle, and I'm gonna call it Andy Ellis for the ridiculous effort that he put into, into all the SampleCons, but SampleCon V1 in particular. So it's a similar kind of moment, and I'm just so proud to watch what SampleCon became. It was this thing in New Orleans to try to get people in a room, like you said. Now it's reached a point where Lucid's barely involved. I mean, we're there, but it's got its own momentum and its own people running it, and it's its own thing unto itself. I'm excited to see what happens with this, because I think it's going to wind up on a similar trajectory. On a personal note, the idea of being able to bring into, well, it would be great if it was a room, but it's a virtual room, but to bring into this room, a dozen or so folks who you and I in particular have gotten to spend a tremendous amount of time with over the past couple of years. And I call them friends at this point. I've spent so much time with some of these folks. We have become more than just business colleagues. We've spent, we've broken bread together. Maybe had a cocktail or two too many together at the occasional time. But to be able to bring them all into the same virtual environment to have this conversation, I'm beyond excited. I mean, I think about, the top of show and the keynote speaker we have in yourself and Ethan Zweig from Catalyst coming in. I think about the folks who are going to be presenting their companies and the advisors they have representing them, which is just phenomenal. And then this group of investors and advisors who have really begun to grok the leverage that the ResTech environment and the companies in this space are going to have in kind of the next generation of what's going to happen in marketing and advertising and user testing, in CX, in identity. I'm just looking forward to seeing how those conversations are going to build. I think it's going to be a blast.
I think it's going to be a blast as well. And I think it's a really good entry point for those that are curious about what's happening in market research and what's happening with technology and market research. If you've seen, obviously, the successful Qualtrics IPO or the Cint IPO, as well as other recent financings, that there's a lot of activity, and the question may be, well, what is going on? What is driving all of this? And I think that this is an entry point for someone who is curious about ResTech and wants to have a greater understanding of why and how is this coming about. I think it's also important for those who are in the space to really see the difference making that naming, identifying it as ResTech, pulling together Escape, and pulling together companies and investors and advisors at the same time, the power of that process, and really being able to bridge the gaps that have plagued us for so long. Going back to what you said very, very early on, sample was not sexy, much less all the other technology.
Yeah.
And now it's really, really sexy. And I think it's important that those of us figure out what's actually going on and why it's so incredibly interesting now, whereas maybe 20 years ago it wasn't seen as anything but a back office process versus something we do in the front of the house.
Exactly.
For me, it's also compelling that we're connected to the New Orleans Entrepreneur Week. They're the producers. We're just a piece of that entire week of content, that week of entrepreneurship and technology based out of New Orleans. I've seen some of the things that we put on, whether that's evening shows and some of the culture coming out of New Orleans, even virtually. And I'm really looking forward to the content of the entire week. But the real story that we're trying to tell broadly from the New Orleans context is we can build category-defining companies, and those companies can define and help mature industries and do it out of places like New Orleans. And I think that's part of the overall story as well that we want to see happen there. So I get excited about showing off what Lucid and ResTech have done to a lot of my peers who may not understand how big, how brassy, and how bold all this actually is. So give them the clue as to what we've actually accomplished, because it's sometimes hard to see.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun, Patrick. It's going to be a lot of fun. I think all the people involved have a lot to be proud of for what they've built. And I'm super curious to see what comes next.
I'm excited. So for those who are curious, who may be listening in, you can go to what's called NOE, New Orleans Entrepreneur Week, and that URL is noew.org. And there are several tabs there for ResTech. You can click on that, register, and see the agenda and the participants there. Anything else you want to add, Brett, on ResTech or anything else before we sign off?
Yeah, no, just that I'm looking forward to seeing everyone on the 24th, and then looking forward to having the conversations with all the folks who attend afterwards, who I'm sure will have a whole lot more questions about the interesting space that we're playing in.
Well, if anyone ever questions how we were able to get such a compelling cast of characters to sign up and say yes, a lot of that comes from you, Brett. You've done a lot of work over the past years representing Lucid to investors, to our partners, but a tremendous leader. And I think we can confidently say that this would not happen if it were not for Brett. So thank you for making it happen with us.
I appreciate that, Patrick. I appreciate that tremendously.
All right. Well, onward. Hope to see everyone there. And again, my name is Patrick Comer. We've been joined by my friend, my colleague, and I think he likes to say it too, co-conspirator Brett Schnittlich. And really excited about the ResTech conference, which is happening on March 24th down here in New Orleans as a part of NOE. So hope to see you there.
We'll see you
Thanks,
there.
everybody.
Bye.
Be sure to subscribe to our show wherever you get your podcasts. For information on ResTech, our complete list of episodes, and more, visit luc.id/lookingglass.